Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the First World War. I'm Mike B, and today we're going to be talking about something that World War I is known for, and it's actually been such a profound thing since the First World War that every major military still issues equipment just in case this ever happens again. We're going to be talking about the use of gas or chemical warfare in the First World War. Now, we're going to talk about some facts, some myths, and some kind of misinformation and kind of rumors, and we're going to talk about why those things happened. And basically, if you sit through this video, you'll understand a lot better the use of gas in World War I and why it's such a huge deal, and why everybody, the first thing they say in World War I is, "Oh, mustard gas." Yep, my great-grandpa was mustard gassed, and we're going to find out that really they probably weren't. But again, you can't call veterans liars because vets never remember things incorrectly or whatever. But we're going to start out, I know that'll piss a lot of people off. Unsubscribing! Okay, that's fine. Anyway, so the first thing, it was 1914, right? In August of 1914, actually 1915, there was a kind of new warfare that came about called trench warfare. I guess I should make a video on how that actually came about. Anyway, so now you've got two basically gigantic armies facing each other in these big lines of trenches. Well, neither side's going to be moving because if you're in a trench, you're pretty well protected even from artillery. So how do you get a bunch of people out of a sector that you can punch through that line? Oh, maybe throw some gas at them if the wind is just right. So the first kind of gas that was used in the First World War was a tear gas. It was kind of like CS, but a little bit more harmful. I'm not a chemist. I have a friend who actually knows all this stuff. I also don't want to be giving out recipes online because it's not good. But anyway, so it had to be a little bit more harmful effects than CS gas, but it wasn't exactly lethal. It was just something that would freak people out. I mean, obviously, if you're just sitting there and all of a sudden your eyes and your lungs start burning, you start coughing, and everybody around you is like puking and throwing up, and you don't know what's going on, you're going to probably run, which is exactly what happened. Pretty sure the first use against that was by German troops to Canadian troops or vice versa. Something like that. No, it wasn't Canadian. It was British. Canadians didn't get there till 15. But anyway, again, all this information, don't just take my word for it. Go and research it yourself. I'm just kind of being the catalyst to get you interested and kind of go down a rabbit hole. So anyway, so that was the first kind of gas that was used. When they realized that it could actually be effective and that the people just ran away because they were freaked out and they were able to pretty much walk into that position, they were like, okay, well, let's go one step farther. So the second kind of gas that was used was in 1915, and that was chlorine. So late 1914 to early 1915, tear gas starts coming out on the field. Chlorine gas now, right? It was basically, you see those big lines of canisters, like pressurized canisters. You see pictures of those with the big hoses that go out above the trench. The guys are wearing gas masks. This is where you start seeing gas masks be introduced, like these rudimentary ones that are a cloth and some goggles, like welding goggles. And then they started getting more advanced, but we'll do a whole other video on that. Anyway, you see those and they literally just open up the bottle and it would just go out. The wind had to be just right though, because they started realizing that method of delivery is very dangerous for the people, because a lot of times it would go out and then the wind would shift and it would come back right on the people who it released. And chlorine is, it's not necessarily a Phosgene agent, which means it's like not a contact thing. You would literally have to inhale it for it to do its most damage, but it still does irritate skin. You ever been in a pool for a long time? It dries out your skin. It's chlorine is an acid, so it tends to suck up moisture and hurt you. Again, you can wash it off with water. It's harmful as hell, but then gas masks started becoming more advanced and the chlorine wasn't as effective as people would have liked. Now, this next one, and also you can see chlorine. It's a kind of a greenish yellow gas that comes over, and it's like, okay, it's not very concealed. Now the next kind of gas is actually the one that accounted for about 85% of all gas-related casualties in the First World War, and that was Phosgene. So Phosgene is, again, I'm not going to give you the chemical makeup. If you want to go research that, I'm sure it's somewhere on the internet, but I'm not going to give you it here because A, I'm not a chemist, B, not a good thing to do. And I'm looking at it, okay. So yeah, Phosgene, what this does is it was a clear gas. It didn't have really any smell. Chlorine smells like, if you're in a swimming pool, you smell the very, very diluted version of chlorine. Imagine that about 50 times, or like you're huffing a thing of bleach, but stronger. So it's very, very easy to tell that you're being gassed at that point. Phosgene, however, is an odorless, colorless gas, and it doesn't affect you right away. So a lot of times, the French love this gas. Okay, the French and the Germans did this to each other all the time. That was where you see the biggest kind of situation where there's gas being used. It was used on the Eastern Front, but then it started to, when that front kind of came to an end, it was moving more west, and they used a lot of it. This also started in like late 1915 to early 1916, and the reason it was so destructive and just so absolutely terrifying for anybody who was a victim of it was the fact that you couldn't detect it until about 2 days later. You get like extreme, like acute pneumonia, which means your lungs just fill up with fluid and you can't reverse it. Like the damage is done at that point. It starts basically eating away at your lungs and your respiratory system, and you end up just, you die. It's like Spanish flu on steroids, right? And it happens in around 48 hours, depending on the batch, how much you get exposed to. So that's why it was so extremely terrifying. That's why 85% of all gas-related casualties came from that. Now, mustard gas, right? This is another one this is probably the most terrifying one in general because the effects were absolutely horrific. Phosgene, you can get it on you, and it doesn't irritate your skin as badly as straight-up chlorine gas. Mustard gas, which is a chemical compound that I don't know who would even try to figure that out, but anyway, it's a vesicant agent, which means that you don't have to breathe it in for it to take you out of the fight. This lands anywhere on your skin, and you get a decent enough amount, you can get blisters that get to be about that high, right? And although only about 2 or 3% of gas-related casualties were actually caused by mustard gas, and it started being used in mid to late 1917, the Germans loved it. We actually used it too. And by this time, it was being launched in shells. So you'd have an artillery shell that could actually get it away from your guys and deliver it directly onto a position, or indirect fire, but like more directly onto a position and more guaranteed to be within close proximity to soldiers. Now, mustard gas was probably the worst, the most feared gas towards the end of the war because of the fact that you don't need to breathe it in and the masks really don't help you. If you were exposed to that, your skin, you blister up. Even if you had just a light exposure, I've read some Americans that were actually gassed, like it was being used. They said that they got it, they're wearing wool uniforms, and their armpits, anywhere that moisture builds up, it'll attract to, kind of like CS gas, and that's, your groin area. So if you figure that out, a lot of guys have issues with that, and it can cause sterility because it just destroys everything in its path. And if you do breathe it in, you are FUC to the KED. This stuff is pretty unforgiving as far as breathing it in. It's a very terrible thing, and although it didn't account for that many actual casualties, the psychological effect still is with us today, because there's still people that have this stuff in storage. Now, all that being said, those are the 4 main types of gases. That they experiment with some other ones, but I'm not 100% positive on those, so I'll have to do some research and make a video on that. Now, all this being said, you'd think that that was the only weapon being used in the First World War, but you'd be incorrect. Less than 1% of all casualties in the First World War, from every country involved, less than 1% of all casualties, this is casualties too, not just deaths, casualties, were caused by gas warfare. So, although it's a massive number because there was a massive amount of people who lost their lives and just massive amount of casualties in the First World War, it's still not as widely used, and it wasn't as effective as everybody thinks at that time. The psychological effect is where it really stuck, and I think that's more than any single weapon that was ever used in the First World War. Artillery, it sucks, but you expect that, and you can hear it when it's coming, and it is what it is. Machine guns, all that stuff, nothing compared psychologically to gas warfare. Even though it accounted for very few casualties, relatively speaking, 1 is too many, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. It was still just so effed up that, like, it's still today, we're issued gas masks and entire suits, and we got to keep up with the times, even though gas really hasn't been used on a large scale. like it was in the First World War since then, because a lot of countries, you know, little town in Switzerland says you can't do that, and a lot of people just agreed that, hey, we'll kill each other conventionally. So we'll kill each other with fire and stuff like that. That's fine. But yeah, so I hope that sheds some light. This is like a macro level, absolutely macro level discussion about gas warfare. I just wanted to kind of talk about some facts and then some myths that, you know, oh, it was, you know, and it, you know, basically you talk to everybody who had a relative in the First World War, they all say, oh, he was exposed to mustard gas, he got gassed. And it's like, so if it accounted for less than 1% of all casualties, like all these 4 gases combined, the odds that your family member was actually exposed to mustard gas was probably more of a psychological thing, and they were probably talking about it and then eventually didn't remember it correctly, just given those numbers. But it was terrifying enough to where people would say, hey, I walked through an area where it was like 4 days earlier. Yeah, so I mean, that would be enough to expose, I guess. But anyway, I'll wrap this video up. Let me know if you got any questions. I'll try to answer them. I'm not a total expert on this or anything else. I have 0 credentials. I'm just a historian that's doing my own thing. I'm an amateur historian. I'm not at all good at what I do. So now that you know all that, again, I want to inspire you guys to do the same research that I do in my free time and come up with your own conclusions based on facts and looking at history a little bit differently and learning how to do research. So again, don't take my word for it. I appreciate you watching, and I hope this kind of sparked some interest and you can go down a rabbit hole and be like, oh wow, well gas, yeah, less than 1%. So very interesting. I will stop rambling now. This video's probably gone on way too much. Kind of got off on some tangents. But anyway, yeah, this channel does just depend on your support. I like having props to kind of do these things with. I want to get some more gas masks to show you guys some examples. But again, I can no longer afford to fund stuff like that just for the channel. So this channel does depend on your support. Patreon is a great way to do this. It's really easy. I post exclusive content on there. Go check it out. Link is in the description. If not, I just appreciate you watching. I would appreciate the support, but I get it if you don't want to do $1 a month for free content. That's fine. I don't mind just doing this. I've already got props and stuff, but if you guys want to see some better stuff, it would help out. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm just going to shut up. Have a good one.